Most people think Canada's story starts with maple syrup and polite apologies. It doesn't. It starts with Vikings landing on its shores 500 years before Columbus, a mixed-race nation fighting for its own survival, and a secret operation that moved more gold across an ocean than any point in human history. This is the real, brutal, and untold history of Canada, and it's nothing like you were taught. Stretching across nearly 4 million square miles and 6 time zones, Canada is the second largest country on Earth, a nation so immense that it holds almost every climate imaginable within its borders. Jagged Rocky Mountain peaks give way to endless golden prairies. Dense misty rainforests blanket the Pacific coastline, while far to the north, frozen tundra stretches toward the Arctic. But Canada's diversity isn't just written into its landscape. It lives in its people. For thousands of years, waves of settlers, explorers, and migrants from every corner of the globe have arrived here, each bringing their own language, faith, and way of life. Tension and conflict were part of that story, but so was cooperation, different peoples slowly weaving themselves into a single complex national identity. This is the story of how that identity was forged, from the first footsteps of Indigenous peoples thousands of years ago to the multicultural powerhouse Canada has become today. Long before written history, humans crossed into North America over a frozen land corridor connecting Siberia to Alaska, roughly 16,000 years ago. As the last ice age ended and global temperatures rose, melting glaciers flooded that corridor beneath rising seas around 11,000 years ago, sealing off the 2 continents for good. But by then, the migration had already changed everything. Freed from the retreating ice, these early travelers pushed steadily southward, spreading across what would eventually become Canadian soil. Over countless generations, distinct nations and languages took root. In the east, the Algonquian and Iroquoian peoples built extensive networks stretching from Hudson Bay down to the Atlantic coastline. Out on the Central Plains, Cree-speaking communities followed the great bison herds as nomadic hunters. To the west, Dean and Salish-speaking nations thrived on the region's abundant salmon runs, using towering cedar trees to construct homes, canoes, and totem poles. And in the far north, the Inuit carved out a life across the Arctic's icy expanse, ranging from Alaska all the way to Greenland. Unlike the rest of the Americas, where European contact is traced back to Christopher Columbus in 1492, Canada's European story begins nearly 5 centuries earlier. In the early 1000s, Norse seafarers who had already colonized Iceland and parts of Greenland pushed further west in search of new land. Leif Erikson is widely credited as the first European to set foot on North American soil, landing on territory he called Helluland and Markland, likely present-day Baffin Island and the Labrador coast. Pressing further south, Erikson's expeditions eventually established the first known European settlement anywhere in the Americas, believed to be located at what is now L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland. The Norse called this land Vinland, and it served as a launching point for further voyages along the coastline, voyages that led to the first recorded encounters between Europeans and Indigenous peoples, whom the Norse referred to as Skraelings. Communication between these remote Norse outposts and their Scandinavian homeland was painfully slow, and the settlements themselves proved short-lived. By the 1100s, the colony at L'Anse aux Meadows had been abandoned, and over the following generations the Norse gradually withdrew from their remaining footholds in Greenland as well. With their departure, knowledge of this distant land faded from European memory entirely, and it would take another 500 years before Europe rediscovered it. In 1497, just 5 years after Columbus reached the Caribbean, an Italian navigator named Giovanni Caboto, sailing under the English flag as John Cabot, became the first European since the Vikings to reach North America's shores. Over the following decades, English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese explorers all charted expeditions to the region. Yet despite these rival claims, none translated into lasting settlements until 1534, when French explorer Jacques Cartier sailed into the Gulf of St. Lawrence and claimed the land for France, naming it after a local indigenous word for settlement, Canada. His later voyages pushed further inland along the St. Lawrence River, resulting in short-lived French outposts. Though each ultimately failed, Cartier had planted the idea of Canada as a valuable future colony. By the start of the 1600s, only scattered fishermen and fur traders still visited Canada's coastline. That changed with Samuel de Champlain, who began a series of detailed expeditions in 1603. Champlain identified key locations for permanent settlement, founding Port Royal in Nova Scotia in 1605 and the city of Quebec in 1608, which would go on to become the capital of New France. Venturing deep into the continental interior, Champlain became the first European to lay eyes on the Great Lakes and forged crucial alliances with local indigenous nations. Thanks to his efforts, a steady trickle of French settlers arrived, growing the colony to roughly 3,000 people by the mid-1600s. The French weren't alone in staking their claim. English forces under Humphrey Gilbert had already asserted control over St. John's, Newfoundland, back in 1583. Nearly a century later, in 1670, the Hudson's Bay Company was founded, establishing a vast network of fur trading posts across the Northern Territory known as Rupert's Land, a deliberate move to challenge French dominance further south. By the early 1700s, the continent had effectively split into two rival spheres of influence: a French territory spanning the St. Lawrence, the Great Lakes, and down through the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico, and a British territory covering Hudson Bay and nearly the entire Atlantic seaboard, from Georgia up to Newfoundland. With two empires competing for the same land and resources, conflict was almost guaranteed. Throughout the late 1600s and mid-1700s, a series of wars between French and British forces repeatedly redrew the map of North America. But it was the outbreak of the French and Indian War in 1754 that would permanently reshape Canada's destiny. This regional struggle was part of the larger global 7 Years' War, pitting France and Britain, along with their colonies, against one another across the continent. Though the French held the early advantage, they steadily lost ground. First in Nova Scotia, where the French-speaking Acadian population was forcibly expelled by British forces, and then in 1759, when Quebec, the heart of New France, fell after the pivotal Battle of the Plains of Abraham. Within a year, the remaining French strongholds collapsed, and by the war's end in 1763, France formally surrendered all claims to mainland North America. British rule began with efforts to mend relationships with indigenous nations who had been drawn into the previous conflict. The new administration also preserved much of Quebec's French legal, religious, and social customs, a decision whose legacy still shapes the province today. But while Britain worked to secure its Canadian territories, unrest was brewing elsewhere, in its 13 American colonies. Anger over taxation without representation eventually erupted into full rebellion. While a handful of Canadians sympathized with the American cause, most stayed loyal to the British Crown, repelling an unsuccessful American invasion of Quebec in 1775. For the remainder of the war, Canada functioned as a secure staging ground for British military operations. The American Revolutionary War ended in 1783, with the United States securing its independence and establishing new borders, largely following the old boundaries of the original 13 colonies, marked by the St. Lawrence River, the Great Lakes, the Mississippi, and the 45th and 49th parallels. That same year, thousands of Loyalists who refused to remain in the newly independent United States fled north into Canada, founding new communities in Nova Scotia and establishing the colony of New Brunswick. Others settled in Quebec, which was split in 1791 into the French-speaking Lower Canada and the English-speaking Upper Canada. The latter centered on the newly founded city of York, known today as Toronto. Far to the west, on the Pacific coast, a separate struggle for control was unfolding. Spanish explorers first charted the region in the mid-1770s, but never backed their claims with lasting settlements, leaving Britain to establish dominance instead. Captain James Cook's 1778 visit to Vancouver Island opened trade relations with local Indigenous nations, sparking a lucrative sea otter trade with China. Despite a brief standoff with Spain in 1789 over competing claims, Britain secured the region peacefully. Throughout the 1790s, further expeditions, both by sea, led by George Vancouver, and overland, led by explorers like Sir Alexander Mackenzie, mapped new routes through the Rockies, paving the way for permanent settlements in what would become British Columbia. By the turn of the 19th century, relations between Britain and the United States had begun to sour once again, fueled by territorial disputes, trade restrictions, and Britain's practice of forcibly recruiting American sailors into the Royal Navy. By 1812, tensions boiled over into open war as American forces launched an invasion into British Canada.